Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
Dr. Kim Plump. Oh my god, that was a brain freeze, sorry. I study the human skeleton, evolution, and health and disease.
If you don't redo it, I can't edit that part out.
Okay. I'm Dr.
You can. Well, every time I say I'm gonna edit something out, I leave it in. So I don't know. We're just gonna have a really long intro this time.
Okay. I'm Dr. Kimberly Plump. I'm a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and evolution. There we go. I know who I am.
And Ross is away today, but in his place we have two special guests.
Yeah, hi. I'm Dr. Sara Hales-Brittain. I work in scholarly publishing now, but in my previous life, I was a classicist studying the ancient Greek novels.
And I'm Sam Siegel, and I work in sexual violence prevention in Arkansas.
Oh, wow.
And I've invited you here today because you also host a podcast with a kind of similar theme to our own.
Yeah, so we host, along with our third co-host, Luke Patrick, Greased Lightning, a podcast about myths, ancient history, and the movies.
Cool.
So on that podcast, you pair an ancient Greek myth with a movie, either about it or related to it, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the relationships are closer than others, but the Sam and Luke have been very generous to just sort of let me have fun with pairing up myths and movies for some of those.
Very cool. It's a cool idea.
Well, that's what we're doing here because this is a podcast about Stone Age movies, and you've selected for us the TV miniseries Attila from 2001, which has nothing to do with the Stone Age. I'll let you know what our baseline is on this one. In a previous episode, we definitely had a conversation where we had to clarify that Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan were different people. So...
Okay.
I didn't even take notes for this one because it's like, I have no idea what's real and what's fiction in this one. I don't have any idea what to say. So I'm really counting on you guys to tell us where this one goes astray from history.
Well, I don't know if this is going to make you feel better or worse, but all of our sources for this, for Attila, are very fragmentary. So we don't fully know what's going on either.
Well, can I ask the two of you to summarize this two-part TV miniseries for us?
Sure, yeah. So I'll take episode 1. So I want to kind of set the scene. You boot up Stars, which, if you're like me, you've been paying for like 3 years and have used maybe twice. And it comes up with a set of like content warnings, and one of them is new to you, and it is insensitive cultural depiction. Which really sets a tone.
Yeah.
And then, let's see, so we open on a young boy, Attila, and his sort of like village, like kind of tribal setting, is raided by other Huns after his father goes into some other lands on a hunt. So his parents are killed, he's taken in by his uncle, and he trains with his uncle a bit, and then he grows up into the obviously very Hunnic Gerard Butler, who has quite the mane of hair. And there's a bit of like a brewing power struggle with his brother Bleda, who is the older brother, and so he's set to inherit things from their uncle. And during this, he comes into contact with Roman general Flavius, I've biffed it, Adius, and they kind of work together, and we get this background of Adius being like in the doghouse back in Rome. He gets released from prison due to his knowledge of the Huns, and he's got this power struggle with the Emperor's mom, who kind of seems to be in charge of things, but she sort of begrudgingly lets him out of prison so that he can intervene with the Huns. He goes and visits them, kind of strikes up like a friendship with Attila, brings Attila back to Rome, and he just kind of lives in Rome for a little bit, learns about the Romans. Sarah, am I leaving stuff out? Because I feel like I really am.
I don't feel like you're leaving out anything important. I think Galen might be the only other person to really mention here.
Yeah, so Galen is like a witch, a soothsayer, I guess, who seems to not age at all and has a bunch of visions of Attila's future. So she is one of the Huns and keeps passing on these like visions of his like rising to power, his succeeding in battle, his finding a very special sword that was belongs to their war god, I believe. And so he's kind of following her sort of guidance based on these visions, and gets kind of frustrated with him after a while. And at the end, she dies at the end of part 1. Is that right? Because because he's in a trial by combat with his brother, and he keeps getting hit with arrows, and somehow the pain from that transfers to Galen, and she dies and he doesn't. And then he yells at her grave and finds the special sword.
Yeah, and then
I have no reason to believe that part wasn't entirely historically accurate.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so I think part 1 ends basically with like Attila wins, Bleda dies, Galen dies. And now there's also like, there's this girl who was captured in one of their village raids that Attila was like really, it was like love at first sight because she tried to kill him. But Bleda saw that.
And she had red hair.
Yeah.
Red hair, yeah.
That was a really important like fetish for him.
Yeah, they really made a thing of that.
Mm-hmm.
But Bleda doesn't like Attila, and so he claims the girl for himself, basically out of spite. But now that Bleda is dead, Attila is free to marry this girl. And part 2, I think, if I'm remembering right, part 2 starts with her dying in childbirth, basically. So she's given him a son, but now she's dead. He's very sad, and he goes and yells at Galen's grave and finds the sword just barely beneath the surface of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he just like scoots out like 2 inches of mud, and there it is. But never mind that. So he's got the sword. He unites all these Hunnic tribes as well as some other like tribes from all over Europe. The king of the Finns is there, mystifyingly paying tribute to Attila. But he is getting ready to march on Constantinople. Meanwhile, back at Rome, Flavius Aetius is trying to deal with the situation and is going to go to Constantinople to talk to Theodosius about how to handle this. And he's taking the Western Roman princess Honoria with him because she has been disgraced having an affair with her steward and plotting to overthrow her brother, the Emperor Valentinian. So she's been exiled to Constantinople. They surprise her by sending her to a convent. And so she's panicking, she's freaking out, and she ends up writing a letter to Attila, who she knew back in Rome, or in Ravenna, and she says, like, I will marry you if you get me out of here. Here's my ring, so you know it's really me sending this letter. And, like, meanwhile, Aetius's ability to deal with this has, like, just not worked. He's tried to talk to Attila, and things have not gone well. And so for Attila, this letter from Honoria is a great pretext to invade the Western Empire. Aetius also has a backup plan because when he was at Theodosius's court, there was this slave girl named Ildico who looks shockingly like the wife who died in childbirth at the beginning of this part 2. The only difference being her hair color. And she is a slave because her village was destroyed by the Huns. So Aetius says, I have an opportunity for you to get revenge against the Huns. How would you like to seduce the king? And he dyes her hair red, and she hangs out as like one of the camp women, one of the slaves in Attila's settlement until he notices her, basically. And then they get engaged. Meanwhile, Attila is invading the Roman Empire and marching through Gaul on his way to Rome. He fights this battle at the city of Orleans, where Aetius has said they will probably go. He knocks down a wall by very cleverly figuring out where the weak spot is, so they win the battle. At this point, I honestly zoned out a little bit because things were getting weird. But there is one more battle where Aetius has teamed up with the Visigoths, even though the king of the Visigoths, Theodoric, is like his personal enemy because Aetius stole Theodoric's wife and infant daughter and like raised the daughter as his own. So he's forced to give the daughter back to this biological father that she has never known. So that's very awful and sad for her. But Aetius and Theodoric and the Visigoths are fighting against Attila and his Huns at this Battle of Chalon. And Theodoric is killed, sort of by his own side, and it's made to look like it was just an accident of battle. Nobody really wins, but nobody really loses either. They both pretty much hold their own ground, but there are so many casualties that neither of them can afford to attack again. So they're like, well, we'll go home, we'll wait out the winter, we'll try again next spring. He goes home and marries Ildico, who has been waiting for this moment to take her revenge. She puts some poison into Attila's wine when they have one last toast on their wedding night, which he immediately, chokes on and dies. And so then she is discovered with his body the next morning. Attila's right-hand man promptly executes her. They have a big dramatic funeral for Attila. And then the movie ends by telling us we are now entering the Dark Ages. And I just want to say, I didn't take a lot of notes on part 2, but the last note I have in my notebook is literally, the Dark Ages? Fuck you. This is a terrible term. If you are someone out there who's using that term, stop. And that's Attila.
Yeah. What a wild flick.
Truly.
So, you said you watched this on Stars.
Yeah.
I have never heard of Stars except from your podcast, so I know you're using that. I found this on YouTube under the name Hollywood Action Movies 2016 English Adventure Movies 2016 Hollywood New War Movies 2016.
That's the one I watched.
I was a little worried it wasn't the right one, and I was watching, and you have the intro with Attila as a child, and then it cuts to the Roman Empire, and we have Emperor Buster Bluth learning how to use a bow and arrow indoors.
Yes.
Really comically, and I'm like, this can't be the right movie. This has to be some sort of parody of the movie.
Sadly, it's not. What I love is how accurate this movie is in depicting the Huns as just Scottish people.
Yeah.
Because every actor playing the Huns is a Scot. And they don't make an attempt with accents. It's buck wild.
Yeah, as you may know, if you listen to Grease Lightning, you know that we are all for actors just using their real accents, and historical accuracy be damned. We can have Scottish Huns, but what really gets me is that, at least for Gerard Butler, he is trying to not sound Scottish, and every time he gets agitated, he fails completely at not sounding Scottish. He just it's barely in check the entire time. It would be better to just use your voice, dude.
Just let it go. Yeah, let us forget about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I was kind of hoping Ross would be here for this episode so I could ask him about where that accent is from specifically. Ross is from Scotland.
Yeah,
so.
I was really excited to see how it was for him just seeing the robust Scottish representation.
Yeah. I think Gerard Butler is from Paisley, but I don't know really what that means for accents.
Yeah, all I know is that the guy who played Blada is from Glasgow, and that's it.
Well, after we summarize the movie, we typically like to start by nitpicking all of the historical inaccuracies. We can do this as pedantically as possible to start with, and then sort of flow into larger discussions about the rest of the film. As I said, I don't know anything about this time period. I like to turn to IMDb, to their factual errors and goofs section, so I can see that things like the Roman uniforms are from the wrong period, stuff like that. Is there anything that stood out to you as factually inaccurate?
Trebuchets. This infuriated me on a level that it shouldn't. The Huns are shown to be using like trebuchets. And I will preface this by saying I did kind of a deeper dive into figuring out, like, you know, the time periods for all of this. And the terminology for siege engines makes zero sense and is deeply confusing. So there are catapults and there are trebuchets, but they're also not called those things. Because catapults, I think, is a term for, like, the machine. But the actual item was called an onager for reasons. And then with trebuchets, there are two types. There's a traction trebuchet, which is called a mangonel. I don't know why. And then there's the counterweight trebuchet, which is the one we all think of. So they're using counterweight trebuchets, which is the one where, you know, it's got a heavy thing on the end that pulls it down. Those wouldn't be used in Europe for like 600 fucking years. And so it is absolutely
very wrong.
It's so baffling to me. When catapults are right there, we all know catapults. We know they would have used them. It's right there. They're also easier to build, so I don't really know why the production would go through all the work of building a stupid counterweight trebuchet when they could have just done a stupid catapult. But
maybe they just had one laying around.
They do call them catapults in the movie. They don't call them trebuchets.
Oh, and you think I didn't clock that too? Because I was like, these aren't fucking catapults. What is wrong with you? Now, is some of it because I may have put over 1,000 hours into the video game Total War Attila, which did not influence my choice of movie? Perhaps.
Oh, man. Well, the thing that really gets me, I'm sorry, I'm going back to the casting choices for this movie just for a minute. I just want to read you an ancient description of Attila. And you can decide whether you think the 6'2", totally built and gorgeous Gerard Butler was the correct casting choice for this. So this is from a historian named Jordanes, and he was writing about 100 years after Attila's death, but he's pulling very heavily from sources, including a guy who actually met Attila and wrote an account of his time in Attila's court. So this is probably about as accurate as it gets for, you know, something at this historical distance. The game of telephone in this case is pretty short between sources. So this is the description of Attila. He was short of stature, with a broad chest and a large head. His eyes were small, his beard thin and sprinkled with gray, and he had a flat nose and a swarthy complexion, showing the evidences of his origin, which I think that is basically an ancient Roman way of saying he looked like Eurasian, basically. Like, to someone growing up in the Western Empire, he has some features that mark him as maybe being from Western Asia, as opposed to, like, from Gaul or Spain or something like that. So he's just a little guy with like a little bitty beard.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta tell you, you read that to a sketch artist, and you're getting a drawing of Gerard Butler. I'm pretty sure. That's...
Yeah, it's baffling to me. But there are a lot of places in this show where they take historical holes and historical, you know, rumors, and they just sort of run with them and fill them in just sort of however they want to. So the Huns had an oral tradition. So we don't have anything written down from them, from their perspective about their own history and religion and things like that. So we don't really know very much about Hunnic religion. The sword being the sword of Mars comes from a Roman source, and it's hard to know whether it was meant as just like, this is a sword of war because I'm the conquering hero Attila, or if they're, or if the Roman guy is just interpreting some sort of religious element into that or not. So there's sort of some questions there. There's one source, I think Jordanes is the one who sort of implies that Attila might have killed Bleda, but they ruled together for 11 years before Bleda died. Mm-hmm. And we don't actually know. We have no evidence whatsoever for how Bleda died. We just know that he did. So the whole trial by combat thing is sort of invented. Galen's visions and like her position in society as the prophet are invented. All the stuff.
He was a real person?
Maybe. There's no historical record of somebody like that.
Oh, okay.
So I think they sort of invented her.
Right.
But yeah, that everything about the Hunnic religion and interaction with the supernatural, as far as I know, is just sort of like they took tiny little pieces of potential evidence and just sort of ran with them. The stuff about Honoria sending her ring and an appeal to help for Attila, that's real. But we don't think she was actually sent to a convent in Constantinople. It seems like she was in Italy, and she didn't propose marriage. She was asking for his help in getting her out of a marriage. And he needed an excuse to invade the Western Empire. So he interpreted this letter as a proposal and was like, yes, I accept. You are now my fiance, and here I come to get you your share of the imperial power. We're going to take Gaul for us. You and me, Honoria. And of course...
She's like, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah. Although it sounds like she maybe didn't protest too hard because she had been actually plotting against her brother Valentinian. And so this was a way for her to like share. The idea, I think, was to share power between like Valentinian gets Italy and she and Attila get Gaul. But who knows about that? And Sam knows more about this than I do because Sam did some research on Flavius Aetius, but he was never actually in prison. Like, he was sort of involved in a potential coup at one point, but he managed to sort of weasel his way out of punishment for that, it seems.
Yeah, so that was pretty wild. So the bit about him, like, being aware of, like, the Huns and their practices and stuff was actually true. So when he was pretty young, like, maybe around, like, 15, he was a hostage in the court of the Visigothic king. And after a while, he was kind of shipped off to the court of the Hunnic king. And so he stayed for like several years there and kind of like gained some respect there, learned about their practices, and then just maybe at Attila that may have happened. I couldn't find anything that said definitively that he did. So he definitely had that background. And then in 423 CE, the Western Roman Emperor died, and there was the Eastern Roman Emperor's cousin, Valentinian III, who they wanted on the throne, and then there was just this usurper, Joannes, or John, I've also seen him called, who asked Flavius Aetius to support him, and so Aetius assembled this force of Huns to go and support Joannes's claim for the throne. It took him a while to do that. So during that time, the Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II organized a military force to put Valentinian on the throne, and so Aetius shows up in Western Roman Empire. So I guess Ravenna, I assume.
Yeah.
And Joannes is dead, and Valentinian is very much on the throne, and Aetius is firmly on his shit list. However, he had a sizable army of Huns that were just raring to go. And so Aetius and Valentinian's mom, Galla Placidia, basically like worked out an agreement where he'll send the Huns home without killing anyone, and he'll get the role Magister Militum per Gallius, so the commander-in-chief of the Roman army in Gaul. And he just ran with it. So like, he wasn't imprisoned like the movie shows, but there was definitely some hard feelings. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. One of the other interesting things I think about this movie is I guess it shouldn't be surprising because movies about ancient history love to just do this. The randomly inserted romances in this. We know that upper class Huns practiced polygamy, and we know that Attila had multiple wives. But why we need to have this one grand love of his life, who was a hostage from a village raid, and not somebody that an elite of Attila's level would actually be interested in marrying for the optics of it and the political machinations that are weddings for the elite at this time. That wouldn't have happened. And just the romantic drama that's put in there, no evidence whatsoever for that. Also, no confirmed evidence that Ildiko actually killed him. It's true that he died on his wedding night to her, but his death is just as likely sort of a freak accident. So from what we know of what was discovered the next day when they finally broke down the door because he wasn't answering, they found him lying there dead on the bed, and Ildiko sitting next to him sobbing because she knew she was going to be in trouble when they were discovered, and she didn't really know what to do. And so there were people who thought she may have poisoned him or something, but it seems like he choked on his own blood, basically. And this can happen when blood vessels burst in your esophagus. This can happen sort of randomly, but it also can be the result, the weakening of these blood vessels can be the result of excessive alcohol consumption. And so it's just as likely that basically Attila drank himself to death and then died of internal bleeding on his wedding night. And this is a night where he would have been partying hard, right? So the whole Germanic slave girl out for revenge, seducing Attila and murdering him thing, by making herself look like his dead love, that whole plot line just really hurt to watch. And I feel like we need to vindicate Ildiko. She's probably innocent.
Yeah, she would have been better off being his wife than doing that, right? You'd have to have...
Definitely.
Yeah.
And if she wanted to murder him, doing it on the wedding night where she's the only one with him, right? That's...
Yeah, no.
You do it in a way where you can throw suspicion on other people.
Yeah.
Well, she was asked earlier if she was willing to die to take out Attila, so she was... I guess that was just the plan all along.
That's true.
Yeah. So Josh, you actually brought up the Roman military equipment, and so I kind of looked into it because it didn't feel right to me, and it's super wrong. So what we see is what you typically think of when you think of Roman legions, but the idea of Roman legions was kind of gone by this point. So by 400 CE, the Roman army basically transitioned from an expansionist army to a defensive one. So they didn't require the same sorts of usage that the equipment that they had before. And they also mostly had foreign soldiers at this point. And they would federate basically captured conquered peoples. So they were less heavily armored, foot soldiers. They also relied more on heavily armored cavalry, which I don't think we see at all in the movie. And their foot soldiers adopted the equipment that was previously basically used for their cavalry. So like round shields, longer swords, spears, and like mail armor rather as opposed to like that segmented like plate armor that you see. And I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently reenactors have found that segmented armor to be very uncomfortable and chafing. And so it might be that, like, that's kind of why they phased it out, because otherwise it's, like, effective armor, but it might just be that it chafed too much. It doesn't sound right, but I don't know.
Well, that would be distracting, and it could also lead to infection, too, right?
True, yeah.
Yeah.
So if it opened up your skin, and...
Yeah, that's a solid point. They also didn't use the pila anymore, so the like... So it's the spear with, like, the really narrow metal tip, and then the wooden kind of throwing shaft. They stopped using those, and instead moved to plumbate, which were, like, these iron or lead-weighted darts. And so they had roughly the same effect as pila, but they were smaller, and they could carry more of them. And they had better range, so that was kind of a lot of what the Roman army had shifted to. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say about that, but I have since forgotten it.
Well, one other big military thing is that this movie completely leaves out Attila's invasion of Italy. Like, we skip that entirely. Like, we just end with this battle in Gaul, and that's the end of his story, according to the show.
Yeah, and they're like, they had this battle in Gaul, and then he went home and beefed it, which is not true. He waited a year, and he came back, and he tore his way through Italy in a big way. Like, Aetius couldn't really stop him, didn't necessarily have the forces, and so he, like, was sacking cities left and right. He leveled Aquileia, is that right? Yeah. And then he made it all the way...
Rome, right?
No, he did not. So he got pretty close. So he made it to the River Po, where he was stopped by, like, a group that included the Pope, who basically was like, hey, do you want to stop, please? And due to, like, a number of factors, including, like, Attila's force didn't have a lot of supplies. They probably were dealing with a lot of, like, diseases. And because the bulk of their forces had left kind of their home territory, they were facing attacks on their home territory. And so they did turn around and leave. And he accomplished kind of nothing.
Yeah, in some ways Attila is sort of like always a bridesmaid, never a bride of conquerors. Because he, like... Okay, so the Huns were unified. Cool. He invades a bunch of territory. And he does actually, like, rule over a very, very large geographical area in Eastern Europe, a little bit of Western Asia, and then, like, he's moving into Germany and Gaul. But he never takes Constantinople. He tries and fails to take Rome. Like, multiple times in his life, he gets very close to doing something big and doesn't. He just, like, he cannot quite get there. And I think that was probably super, super frustrating for him. And maybe one of the reasons he decided after Italy, all right, I'll just go home and get married. And we'll get another wife and we'll try again later. But yeah, he never did take Rome. And some of the ancient sources, now these guys can't entirely be trusted, right? Because they're Romans, for one thing. So they have a certain perspective on the Huns. They're also Christians. And because Christianity is the official religion of the Roman Empire at this point, and the Huns are not Christians. A lot of German tribes were Arian Christians. And so they were at least, there were a lot of sectarian conflicts, but at least they agreed on Jesus, basically. The Huns were not Christian. And so there's like a bigger conflict there for these Roman authors in writing about, like, quote unquote, godless barbarian heathens, whatever. So one of the reasons that's given in some of these sources for, other than there were real reasons for him to turn around, right? Like Sam said, one of the reasons that's given is basically superstition, because maybe the Pope manages to scare him a little bit. But there's also this fact that Rome had been sacked before. In the year 410, a German chieftain named Alaric sacked Rome, and very shortly after he died. And so the sources say that people were reminding Attila of this. Remember, Alaric took Rome and then he died. So don't do that. And so there's some speculation that maybe basically Attila was superstitious. And that's why he turned around. He still died very soon after. So I don't know what we're supposed to make of that, but.
Well, if you get too close, you'll kick it too.
That must be it.
I did find an interesting fact about Edius, if y'all would like to hear it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's a period of time where basically he became the most important guy in the Western Roman Empire. He was essentially leading it because he held so much sway over Valentinian. And there was this uprising of Burgundians in Gaul, and he sent Huns to put it down. And they apparently did so in quite a merciless fashion. I believe destroyed the town of Worms, and the destruction of that inspired the Nibelungenlied, which is a German epic poem that was written in 1200, which inspired Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungens, which I'm fairly certain was a big inspiration for Lord of the Rings. So, if we didn't have Flavius Edius, we would not have Lord of the Rings.
Oh my god.
Cool. Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is very amazing. Humans, man. It's crazy.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, can I ask you, how are we supposed to feel about Attila in this movie? Because he's ostensibly the protagonist, and I know that the historical sources are all written by his enemies, so he's always painted as the scourge of Europe, of the Roman Empire, or whatever he was the scourge of. But he's the protagonist. Whenever we see him, it seems like we're supposed to feel sympathetic towards him. He's always good directly to people, right? He makes a point about how the Romans are deceitful, but he has more honor because he'll just attack directly and just murder everybody face to face. But as you said, we have these romance subplots where the background is that has half a dozen polygamist wives. He very clearly always has a favorite wife and a favorite child amongst his children. There's a scene where he's talking to one of his wives and he's like, "Where's my son?" And she's like, "You have a dozen sons." And he's like, "You know which one I mean. There's only one that matters." Right? And I mean, every time, when we see him in the peaceful scenes talking to people, he seems like a great guy. But then it cuts to him just sacking an innocent farming village and just slicing up farmers. And I felt like the tone was a little confusing. Is he supposed to be the hero, or what are we supposed to feel about him?
Yeah, I got the idea that we were supposed to assume that he was doing what he had to do, but was really a nice guy deep down, was what I got.
Yeah, like a fedora wearing nice guy.
Yeah, because even when the slave girl was marrying him and she was set out to kill him, the guy was like, "Make sure that you don't fall in love with him," right? Because all the women fall in love with him, and so you have to keep your hate going, or else you're not going to kill him. So it was kind of this thing where and she was close to getting wooed by him, right?
Right.
Until he called her by his ex-wife's name.
Yeah, that'll do it.
That was the slip up.
Yeah, that'll do it. I think you make a really good point there, Josh. So about the sort of the dueling perspectives on Attila. And I think in some ways there's a little bit of that in the sources. So the source we have, the Roman guy who actually met Attila and like hung out in his court for a while, is a guy named Priscus, and he was like part of this diplomatic embassy to Attila in 449. And it seems like Attila did present these sort of like dueling aspects of himself. Like he was apparently pretty humble amongst the Huns. Like they go to this big banquet at Attila's home, and everything's being served on like gold and silver plate. Attila is eating everything out of a little wooden bowl and drinking out of a wooden cup. Like he doesn't actually use any of the finery. He's apparently very generous to his generals and his advisors and the people around him. And like when you have a personal relationship with him, he's very generous. He did apparently have a favorite son. It was his like youngest son. And they say that in this banquet, the kid comes in and is Attila like has him sitting on his lap and is like gazing at him like lovingly. And he's clearly like so adoring of this one son. It turns out it's because there's like some prophecy that after Attila dies, this kid will be the one to like carry his empire forward. So he's like very into this one kid, and it's the youngest, which is like not a typical attitude for kings, right? They're usually focused on their older sons.
Yeah.
So there are like all these like wonderful sort of, aspects of Attila's humility and his kindness. But then he does things like he tells the Roman ambassador, I've already talked to one of you people. If you don't have anything new to say to me, GTFO of my territory. And like, he just doesn't care. His mood can turn on a dime and he gets super angry, gets these super dark moods. Just like brutally murdering and like mowing down villages, razing cities. It feels a little bit like some of the things we learn about Alexander the Great, who was like a super nice guy and very generous to his generals and a very understanding and liberal ruler unless you crossed him. And then you and everyone you've ever loved died.
Yeah. Genghis Khan was supposed to be somewhat similar too, right? Like well loved and took care of everybody if you were on his side.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. It kind of makes me wonder if these guys were actually like that. Or if this was like a trope of writing about conquering kings. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. Or it could be part of like a narcissistic complex too, right? Like the ability, the on-off switch. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe some psychopathic tendencies.
See,
Yeah,
I also
totally.
thought like it's kind of just a savvy mood to reward the people who support you and who perform well, and it sort of motivates other people to continue supporting you because they see everybody else getting these lavish gifts.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, are we supposed to like him? I have no idea. I got
the feeling
know.
that we were supposed to. Yeah.
I mean, definitely the casting of Gerard Butler does not help in terms of like trying to dislike him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do make a good point that it's like, just gloss over the fact that he's like mowing down farmers, and just think about his rippling abs.
Yeah, and his tender eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was looking up something, I can't remember what now, the other day, and I just like in and amongst my Google search was a Reddit post titled Gerard Butler's abs destroyed the Roman Empire, and it was like somebody's review of this miniseries, but like that was their title for it. I feel like that's like not an inaccurate summation of this movie's ultimate message.
See, I'm curious what y'all thought of it.
Whether we enjoyed it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was good. It's probably not something that I would have watched on my own. Well, maybe, but I probably would have started it and then stopped it once like all the fighting started and it got boring. But I like historical stuff, and I didn't. Yeah, it was interesting. It was good, entertaining enough. The emperor, the Roman emperor, he was kind of funny in his little just how shitty he was. It was kind of comic
Mhm.
relief a bit.
Yeah, the Roman Emperor, I like in general, but the Roman Emperor kind of, especially at the beginning, threw me out of it a little bit because, like, I understand this Roman Emperor, was this an emperor that, like, became emperor as, like, a child at a very young age? Is that one of them?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So I feel like maybe what they were going for is that when he became emperor as a child, he was unfit to rule. But this guy was like 35.
Mm.
Like, he's acting like a child. But like, if you were raised from 6 years old to be the emperor, by the time you're 35, you're not going to be an unfit child emperor. You're going to be like, your life has been dedicated to being emperor. So I don't know. Is there any historical basis for this emperor being sort of incompetent and childlike?
I don't know how he compared to other emperors, but apparently amongst his own family, he was the dumb one. And like like
That's what they're
Honoria.
getting at.
Yeah. And so like this is part of why Honoria ended up plotting against him, because she was way smarter than him, way more politically savvy, and she knew it. And she knew that she would do a better job than Valentinian was doing at running things. And so like it was just very frustrating to watch, apparently. But I don't think he was as bumbling and immature and incompetent as some of the other Roman emperors. Like that depiction of him like trying to learn how to shoot a bow, you know, and being so pitiful and
shooting
relying on mommy's advice for everything, like everything, everything about that. It did feel like the perfect encapsulation of like some of the Roman emperors of this time period who were just like everything was falling apart and they were a little incompetent, not really prepared, didn't necessarily have the resources anymore to actually rule with anything like decisiveness. And so they're just sort of like resting on the laurels of their family name and enjoying being rich. I don't know how accurate it is for Valentinian III, but for some Roman emperors, yeah, that sort of bumbling nature does seem to be a thing that happened.
I'll say from the research I did, the like lack of political savvy is like sort of supported, because after a while he, you know, kind of soured on Aetius and how much power he had. And so he, a powerful senator, and a eunuch all kind of conspired together to kill Aetius. And so Valentinian did actually stab Aetius to death in 454. But it was a pretty stupid choice because everyone liked Aetius. Like a lot. He was very popular. And so within like a year, that the powerful senator who helped Valentinian like plot it, I believe had him murdered and then took over as emperor.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that it did impress me about this movie was, you know, I probably read like a dozen Wikipedia pages as I was watching, like checking out every new character, and the majority of the characters in the movie are real people in history, and more or less the things that happen in the movie did happen in history. So, like you say, Flavius did kill Aetius by stabbing him, which sounds very much like that should be a made-up thing. The you know, the battles might be out of order and there might be a whole bunch of things missing, but there's the mythology that Attila found this sword buried shallowly in the ground. I mean, I don't think that event is real, but the mythology is real. The fact that he died in his sleep at his wedding was real. Like, all of this stuff, it seemed like there was a lot of room for Hollywood to change the narrative.
yeah.
Because one of the things we talk about when we're doing like true stories from history is that as a writer, you have this problem where you can't create a narrative because the narrative already exists and real life doesn't follow a nice, you know, screenplay structure. So you tend to have to change a lot of things to get that story arc to fit. And so I guess It's probably, again, just because I have no idea. I have no concept of the history of this period, so it's hard for me to criticize it. But I was more impressed that as I looked up these things, I realized that they were really based on real events and real people to a greater extent than I was expecting. So in that regard, I thought it was pretty good. Of course, apart from Galen, who seems to be an entirely fictional character, telepathically taking on all of Attila's injuries and dying in his place, that was a little bit far-fetched, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll tell you, like, doing the research that I did in preparing for this, I also was pretty impressed about, like, how much they mostly got right about, like, the characters and events. Like, even the battle at the end, so at Chalon, or it's also called the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, like, the way that played out was pretty accurate in terms of, like, they both suffered a lot of losses. It was pretty much a stalemate. The Romans just said, we won, and then they all just went home. And Theodoric did die. I don't think he was murdered by a Roman, like, dipshit. I don't know his actual position, but some sort of, like, patsy.
Yeah.
But he did die, and Aetius did tell his sons, like, hey, you should head back and go deal with, like, the succession crisis now.
Yeah.
And then he dipped and went back to, I guess, Ravenna.
Yeah, this is one of those things. I think this really speaks to the sort of chaotic nature of this time period of the late Western Empire, and the charisma of Attila in his own personage, that, you know, they added in some romance, which is weird. They added in this, like, interpersonal drama with Aetius and Theodoric that there's no historical basis for. So they, like, added in some interpersonal things. But like you said, Josh, most of the story is actually based in the historical record. And I do think that speaks to the just, like, totally bonkers nature of the political landscape at this time, that you didn't need to invent a bunch of drama to make this an interesting story and, like, a plot that sort of works, because it really just was that crazy. And, like, everything going wrong for the Romans, you know, that's just actually what was happening at this time.
One of the things that surprised me, because again, I have no idea, I have no concept of this time period and of Attila the Hun before watching this movie. So literally, like, everything I know about Attila, I've learned from watching this movie at this point. But as we said, we had to disambiguate Attila from Genghis Khan, and I guess in the public imagination, there's a lot of overlap between these characters, so I was expecting this was taking place further east. And I was surprised to see that
me too.
most of this Huns territory was in Central and Eastern Europe, like we're fighting in Gaul. I had no idea that this went so far. And looking at the map of the Huns' range on Wikipedia, it's centered on a part of the world where I actually work, which was very interesting to me because I work in Serbia. And the Danube crosses Serbia. So the northern province of Serbia is Pannonia. This is the Pannonian Plain, which is where a lot of this is centered. And they don't mention specifically these cities in the movie, but according to Wikipedia, when the Huns crossed the Danube into the Eastern Roman Empire, they were attacking cities just over the Danube, including Viminatium and Sirmium and Singidunum. And I've been to all these sites in Serbia.
Oh, wow.
Of course, I've been to tons of Roman sites in Serbia as an archaeologist working in Serbia, but I have no concept of Roman archaeology, so I don't have any context for what I'm looking at when I go to these sites.
Oh, yeah.
And so this provided me some good context. Singidunum is now Belgrade, so there's no real archaeological site. There's just Roman ruins underneath the entire city. Sirmium is now Sremska Mitrovica, which is a small city west of Belgrade along the Danube. But then Viminatium is really interesting. Have you guys heard of Viminatium?
Mm-mm.
I'm not sure.
This is an interesting Roman site. It was a Roman city. It was like a city built around a military base along the Danube, a little bit east of Belgrade. And there is no current city at this site, which is a little unusual because so many of the Roman cities, have current cities on top of them. And this one was like entirely lost. And as far as I understand it, there's a coal power plant within view of this archaeological site. My understanding is that there's a huge coal vein there, and they discovered this city by excavating coal. And I think there's like some sort of legal block on mining coal for 50 years or something like this while they excavate this site. And it's an entire city. I've been there several times, and most people around the world haven't heard of it, but Serbia's trying to do a pretty good job of advertising this for tourism. So they've excavated, baths. They've excavated a necropolis. There's a auditorium that they've reconstructed. So they've built this wooden auditorium over top of the stone foundations where now they host events.
Oh, wow.
They've built a large interpretive center in the style of an ancient Roman villa. So they have labs there where the archaeologists actually work. They live at this Roman villa while they're working on the site. And I believe they have sort of like hotel rooms for special events where guests can actually stay. So if for some reason you end up in Serbia and you're like, I have no idea what's in Serbia, I've never heard of it, there's great Roman sites that you can visit, including Viminatium, which I definitely recommend. But it was very interesting for me to know that Attila the Hun had sacked Viminatium, which, apart from these two random events in my life connecting, the fact that I happen to have been there and the fact that I now watch this movie, I can connect those and feel like, oh, wow, I was actually in this place where Attila the Hun, attacked one of these cities. It's pretty cool to know that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah. The Danube was sort of a military border for a lot of the later Roman imperial period. When emperors tried to cross the Danube and continue annexing territory on the far side, things tended not to go well for them. And so they were sort of like crisscrossing the Danube periodically throughout these like first 4 or 5 centuries CE. And so there's, like you said, there's a lot of military outposts, lots and lots of garrisons along the Danube. I got to visit one in Hungary, and now I can't remember what it's called. But it's like a 20-minute train ride outside of Budapest. There's another a Roman former Roman garrison that you can walk around the site. I'm definitely putting Viminatium on my travel list. That's amazing. There's just nothing like walking around an ancient city like that doesn't have a modern one on top of it. Ostia in Italy is like this, where you could just sort of walk around the town and really get a feel for what it was like. It's just absolutely incredible. Yeah, it really is, I think, further west, like these Huns, Attila's Huns. I think a lot of people are surprised to learn that they were like this far west and that this was their territory. Apparently I think it was in the 19th century, there was a guy who had a theory that Attila's Huns were related to the what we typically think of as Huns, the Jungno people who raided Chinese borderlands throughout various periods in history.
Oh, see, I thought they were the same.
It seems like, so I think there's some controversy. Like for a while that was accepted and now it's like maybe not. It might just be like two different nomadic peoples called Huns. But it feels like you would have to have some kind of connection.
Right.
To get that name for both.
I think that's why I thought it was so much farther east was because of Mulan. Like I thought that was Attila in Mulan, the bad guy, right?
Yeah, it's not him. But I think there's got to be some sort of like cultural connection there. But it's unclear to me what that connection is.
Yeah, because when I was doing research on like Hunnic like military practices and equipment and stuff, there were a few things like sword development and stuff like that basically they had gotten from China, and that kind of as those practices moved west, they changed. So like I believe it originally something along the lines of like originally like they sort of took this like Chinese short sword, and as they moved west, it became longer and longer, and basically introduced like a longer sword to Europe, I think. And the like composite bow that they use, I think, also had Chinese influences. And there was a lot of stuff about Sarmatians, which I don't actually know where that fits in geographically, but I am but a humble public health person in Arkansas, so I'm pretty far afield of what I do.
It's one of those things where, we don't have great historical records for any of these people. So it's hard to say anything for sure. But I don't think the connection is something to be totally dismissed. Partly because of these connections that you've both just mentioned, and also partly because like I don't think it's unreasonable for these were nomadic people. So the idea that they started, further east into Asia and then over time made their way into the West is not unreasonable at all, I don't think. The Hunnic invasions of Gothic territory started in the 370s, more or less. 350s, 370s CE. With Attila, mostly we're talking about around 450. So the Huns have been gradually moving west and conquering more and more territory for 100 years by the time we get Attila knocking at the gates of Rome. So it's a long and slow process. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about this flick. We've covered a lot of information here.
I personally just wanted more Tim Curry.
Yeah.
Yes.
I saw Tim Curry on the IMDb list before we watched. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great, but he's only got a couple of scenes.
Yeah, I mean, he chews up that scenery while he's there, but it needs more.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
You have a particular way that you rate movies on your show. Do you have a rating prepared for this one?
Oh,
I've got one, Sam.
Okay, yeah.
If you need to think.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this 3 out of 5 Honoria rings.
Ooh, okay.
It gets a lot of things right, but damn, it's long, and I got bored.
It is long. I think you'd have to watch it as 2 separate shows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I made the mistake of watching it all straight through.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I will give this 6.5 out of 10 swords buried 2 inches in the mud.
Nice.
I was thinking I would give it 3 out of 5 polygamist wives.
Very nice.
Excellent.
Oh. I'd probably give it 3 out of 5 thin beards with gray.
Awesome. So this is a solid D- across the board for Screens of the Stone Age and Grease Lightning.
That's much better than most of the movies we watch, though. Most of the movies we watch get like 3s and 4s on IMDb.
Oof,
Yes.
that's brutal.
Yikes.
Yeah, some of them are horrible.
Well, where can our listeners find you guys?
Yeah, so I mean we're on all major like podcast hubs. So it's Greased Lightning, GREECED, like the country. We're also on Facebook at Greased Lightning Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Greased Lightning Pod. We have an email address if you have some thoughts. So that's greasedlightningpod@gmail.com. I don't mention it much, but it's actually how you found us, Josh. We are on Reddit, and I think it's just Greased Lightning is our profile on there. And so we post in the podcasting subreddit. But yeah, that's pretty much the high points.
Yeah, I never mention it because we don't have a Reddit account. I just post the podcast to the podcasting subreddits from my personal account, which I probably shouldn't do, and I probably shouldn't mention that on the air because now if somebody Googles Screens of the Stone Age, they're going to know my personal Reddit account.
Yeah, I was very careful about not crossing those streams.
Why don't you want your personal...
Reddit's anonymous, so you typically don't really want it
Oh.
associated with your real name. But my account's pretty clean. I really only post anthropology and archaeology and bone identification subreddits,
Mm-hmm.
and also lots of Bigfoot stuff in the past.
Okay.
But nothing that's going to be a problem for me. So we don't have that many listeners. If people want to try and find me on Reddit and dox me, whatever. I will recommend your show to all of our listeners because I've been listening to it a lot. Like I said, I know nothing about ancient Greece and Rome. It's very interesting being able to tie it to a movie, which is the same concept that I had for our podcast. So I think it's a great idea to discuss ancient history by tying it to popular culture. It makes it a lot more accessible, and it's definitely working for me for your show. So definitely check out Grease Lightning. I also love that we both have pun names for our podcast.
Yes. Yeah, it's awesome. And yeah, we just wrapped up our first season,
Mhm.
but season 2 will be coming at an undisclosed time. But
Yes.
we're planning. So we've got our movie list. So yeah, I guess stay tuned for that.
Very cool.
In the meantime, you got a large enough back catalog to last for a little while until you get to season 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for having us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, this was a blast.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Come back anytime if you want to teach us more about ancient Greece or Rome.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with that because we will take you up on it.
Yeah. As you can tell, we like to talk.
Mm-hmm.
So.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.